we just want to take a moment to acknowledge our privilege as settlers on this territory.
The feedback I'm getting from online is that they could hear me really well, but you have a softer, sweeter voice. So increase your volume. Same for the panelists when we get going.
Great. And this is just a map. There's a really cool website called native-land.ca. Basically, it allows you to look at the land that you're on and the actual ancestral territory that you are living on. It's not always in the language that's most easily understandable by English speakers, but it's a really lovely resource. And then just take a moment to say that we have next month scheduled our Farming for Justice is on queering sustainable agriculture. Definitely looking forward to that conversation. And then also, we would like to take a moment to say that at the end of this discussion, we're going to send everybody a short email, one as just a thank you for listening, for being here, for taking a moment to share your knowledge, but also this programming is 100% based on feedback from the community. So if we don't have people letting us know what they think, then we don't really know how to move forward. So I'll send you an evaluation link, and it looks like that in your email, and it takes about like 5 minutes to fill out, and your feedback is really appreciated. So today we have a panel featuring Elizabeth Henderson, Rafa Aponte, Kirby Edmonds, and Mike. And I saw Marissa from the Sunrise Movement in Ithaca. And we'll be discussing how green is the new Green Deal in agriculture. So I'm going to start with having the panelists in the room here introduce themselves. Are you signed in on your computer? Yeah, sweet. Awesome. So I'm just going to give it over to them and have them say what they do in the community.
Let's move the microphone over there too. Thanks.
My name is Mike, he, him, and I graduated from Ithaca College in May. And I'm here in Ithaca. I'm an activist. I work at New Roots High School, and I'm a part of the Sunrise Movement, studying, pushing, and making space for a Green New Deal to tackle our climate crisis and social inequities that have been tied to an extractive and fossil fuel-based economy. And I am really excited to be in this conversation because the more I unpack it, the more I see that food is at the center.
I'm Kirby Edmonds, Program Coordinator and Senior Fellow with the Dorothy Cotton Institute, which manages the Building Bridges Initiative, which is trying to help the city actually meet its goals around the Ithaca Green New Deal Initiative, around community engagement.
Awesome. I guess I'll hand this off to Raphael and then Elizabeth.
Do that again, Rafa.
Rafa's still muted.
Okay, you're on.
Okay. There you go. Hi, folks. Good morning. My name is Rafael Aponte. Everybody calls me Rafa. I'm a farmer here in Tompkins County. I'm coming live and direct from Rocky Acres Community Farm, located in Dryden, New York. It's a 10-acre farm, raise goats and poultry, as well as lots of education. I'm also part of working with these folks to work on the Green New Deal, part of the National Young Farmers Coalition, the Central New York chapter, as well as the Northeast Farmers of Color group.
Thank you, Rafa. Elizabeth Henderson, do you want to introduce yourself? You should be able to unmute yourself too.
just introduce myself? You're going to go around the whole circle?
No, just the panelists, right, are going to be introducing themselves.
Okay. Well, I'm Elizabeth Henderson. I've been an organic farmer since 1979. I'm on the board of the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York, and I represent the NOFAs on the board of the Agricultural Justice Project.
Alexis, I'll let you handle all this.
Great. So I hope everybody can hear me. I'm just gonna speak really loud. Sorry, it's obnoxious in the room. And I guess we can start with Elizabeth. Starting off, I know you have a PowerPoint presentation on the Green New Deal and agriculture. And we can start there, and then we'll go around, I guess, backwards. We'll start online and then come back into the room, and have everybody kind of talk about their where they're coming into the Green New Deal from and its relationship to agriculture, and then also anything that they feel that needs to be brought to the table as far as the Green New Deal and farming equity, sustainability, farm workers, and the like. So I guess we'll start like that.
That's great, Elizabeth. We see your slides.
Okay. You can see it? You can hear me? That's
Yep.
Great. Excellent. Hey, I don't think we should really call this workshop How Green is the Green New Deal, but rather how green can we make the Green New Deal? Because the Green New Deal is not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. And I just recently read a piece by Guy Dauncey, the practical utopian, who compared 10 different versions of the Green New Deal, from Bernie, from Elizabeth Warren, from Inslee, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, from the US Greens, from a couple of Canadian groups, from some groups in the UK. And I really call all of your attention to this article because it includes just a remarkable list of all the possible things that could be in a Green New Deal and that are worth thinking about. And the ideas that we share in this session today can contribute to developing the contributions of the groundswell community to whatever Green New Deal unfolds on either the state or the national levels, and provide ideas also for work on the 2023 Farm Bill. So first, a few words of introduction. Why am I heading off this conversation? I started farming in 1979-80, and at that time, I was well aware of the farm crisis that was underway, with cavalcades of farmers on tractors occupying the streets of DC. And then I moved to Wayne County, New York, and I started one of the earliest CSA farms. I was one of the first 3 in New York State. And CSA was deliberately designed to include customers in supporting family-scale farmers. CSA is the only form of marketing where all of the members of the CSA actually share the risk with the farmers. And in our CSA, all the members not only participated by picking up their own shares, but by doing the farm work and administrative work, overseeing distribution, signing up other members. So we had a very active core group of members that did a tremendous amount of work just by being supporters of our farm and taking the burden off of us as farmers. And members also contributed money to the Genesee Land Trust so that it could buy the land that we were on and then protect it in perpetuity. So I wrote a book about CSA, Sharing the Harvest, and I was totally thrilled to have it translated first into Japanese, then 2 different versions of Chinese, then Thai, and then Spanish. And that led me to become the honorary president of Urgency, which is the international CSA network. And I recommend you check out their website. urgenci.net, which is a great network of farmers all over the world who are involved in solidarity economics. And I've also served on the board of the NOFA Interstate Council and NOFA New York, and I'm on the NOFA's representative to the Agricultural Justice Project. AJP is a domestic fair trade program, and what we've done is created standards for fairness in the food system from farm all the way through to retail. Unlike Fair Trade USA, which focuses just on slightly better prices for the farmers, the Agricultural Justice Project covers the whole food chain and works for fair pricing for farmers, fair labor standards for the people who work on farms, and in all the other kinds of food businesses in the food chain from farm to table. So this is a quick look at our standards, and I'm happy to share more with anyone who wants to hear about that. But my concern about fairness for myself as a farmer and for people who work on the farms is what has brought me to this table today to talk about what we need to do to make a Green New Deal. So what is the Green New Deal? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey put forth this initiative, and it's provided a needed jolt to public consciousness, making it possible for the first time in decades to talk about root solutions for the ongoing crisis of family farms in this region and in the whole country and around the world, without being subject to the won't pass the laugh test suppression due to the capture of Congress by extreme right-wing and corporate interests. We face an intersectional set of crises: climate, ecology, inequality, racial injustice, and they're all interrelated. And meanwhile, the farm crisis that I mentioned at the beginning of my career, it continues to this day. So this country is losing farmland and losing family scale farmers, and the average size of the farms is getting bigger. Secretary of Agriculture Perdue recently crowed, despite the reality that even these big farms are losing money. He said that the answer is get big or get out. So the real net income of farmers, even those biggest farms, has gone down. And what's just devastating and startling is the loss of farms for farmers of color, which has been so much worse than even the average of white farms all over the country. So a lot of work has been done on buy local and in support of family scale farms. But this work has really focused on tinkering around the edges, making incremental improvements that have made it possible for many farms to survive and for some new ones to get started. But the underlying problems of systemic racism that functions as a mainstay of corporate dominance of the food system has been beyond our reach and not realistic. The farmer's share of the food dollar has been shrinking, and big brands have been buying up smaller companies. This is Philip Griffith's ever-growing chart of what's happened just in the consolidation within organic farming and food brands. But the farmer's share has been going down. Farmers have fewer choices of buyers and less market power. Corporate consolidation has everything to do with what is going on. And whether we look at a processed food like bread, so here you see in the upper part of the chart, that's the rise in the price of bread to consumers at supermarkets. And then at the bottom, the blue line shows the very, very slight and not always rise of wheat, the ingredients in bread, to farmers. So consolidation makes all the difference in the power of the corporate entities that control our food system. And here's the chart for broccoli. So even for raw ingredients, the price to consumers is going up way faster than the price that farmers get. Farmers, to stay in business, usually are making most of their living from off-farm sources. So it's either the farmer themselves or members of the family who have an off-farm job. And when the Economic Research Service of the National Agricultural Statistics Service, which is a branch of USDA, which is probably why the Trump administration wants to move this service to somewhere out in Kansas so that the people who are doing this work, putting together this valuable information, all quit. But anyway, when they break it down by commodity, you can see that the median household income from farming is fairly decent for a few crops that are really dominated by very large farms in rice and tobacco and peanuts. But high value crops, which is what are fruit and vegetables, the contribution of the farm to the family income is there, but it's a very small amount of money. And then in livestock, the farm enterprise is actually losing money. And it's because the farm family is making their money somewhere else that the farm is able to stay in business. And when we look at the rest of the food system, or the food system as a whole, the racial gap in wages is quite startling. It's white men who are making the most money, and Latino women way at the bottom, followed by Black women and white men. So it's a gender and racial gap. And because people working in the food system earn so poorly, the use of public assistance is absolutely necessary for many food worker families to survive. So where does that leave us? We have a movement for organic and sustainable agriculture and agroecology that is rich in solutions to these crises. In organic, we have the principles of organic agriculture, health, ecology, fairness, and care, which is a really comprehensive program for improving the conditions of both the earth and the people who work on it. And I call your attention particularly to the principle of fairness, that organic agriculture should build on relationships that ensure fairness. Fairness is characterized by equity, respect, justice, and stewardship of the shared world, both among people and in their relations to other living beings. So human relations should ensure fairness at all levels, to all parties: farmers, workers, processors, distributors, traders, and consumers. Now, this is not part of the National Organic Program, but it is part of the international ideals of organic agriculture. And organic farmers are not just thinking about change, we're acting. Traditional methods of organic agriculture and peasant agriculture provide a major way of addressing the excess carbon in the atmosphere. Farmers are solar engineers cooperating with a miracle machine that does this work for free, photosynthesis. And it's important to keep this in mind in all the discussions of taking carbon out of the air, because people who care about food forget that we don't need to invest billions of dollars in miracle machines. We have trees and plants, and we can do this. Plants exude carbon. And why are they doing this? They are feeding the microherd. They photosynthesize so that they can trade services with microbes and build soil carbon. And the more plants cover the earth, the more trees, the more this carbon sequestration will be going on. So this is one of the answers that we can provide for the rest of the world in these crises. farmers, the farmer justice movement, of which I consider myself a member, going back to the 70s and the 80s, we have the root solution of parity pricing. This worked really well from 1933 through 1953 until it started being eroded by major corporate powers who took over the food system and dominated national USDA policy, bringing about the cheap food policy that dominates to this day. But under parity, when buyers want to pay too little, the farmers hold their crops off the market, and loans that they're provided by the commodity service center of USDA make it possible for the farmers to hold those crops off. And then when prices get back in balance, the farmers can sell those crops. If a crop is short, the reserves can release crops so that there's more for everybody. So that's a farmer-owned grain reserve, which is a buffer in case of disaster. And then what we can add to that is farmer-owned processing for value-added products that can add as a buffer against period of oversupply. So when everybody is selling tomatoes, we can have a county processing cooperative that takes the extra tomatoes. So instead of the price going way down, the price can be steady for tomatoes for farmers through the whole season. And those extra tomatoes can become sun-dried tomatoes, tomato sauce, et cetera, and so forth, and be sold through the rest of the season. And by having parity pricing and supply management combined with conservation efforts, farmers can once again integrate crops and livestock and bring back that biodiversity that makes such a big difference for the health of the farms and the health of the farm economy. So we can have agrarian justice through the Green New Deal. Parity prices, an end to oversupply and food waste, because when farmers are getting a decent price for a set amount of their crop, they don't have to overproduce the way they do when margins are really slim. And we can insist that part of this Green New Deal be living wages for all the food system workers. Then they can not only get off SNAP and EBT, but they can afford to buy the healthy food that they themselves want for their families. So there'll be access to healthy, locally grown, fresh, culturally appropriate food for everybody. And we can have community control through cooperatives, through faith-based initiatives, and community organizations. And I just want to end with a couple more words. We can build the achievement of the New Deal into a Green New Deal that not only provides fair prices from the market, but is linked with social justice. Issues of equity, making sure there's a place at the table for the previous marginalized voices of family-scale farmers, farmers of color, and farm workers, are central to designing the Green New Deal. This is our historic opportunity to put equity front and center in our work for a food system that's worth sustaining. The language of the Green New Deal resolution from AOC and Markey centers on creating a just transition, opening the door to climate justice groups, Indigenous peoples networks, farm workers, and farmers of color. Our voices demand support for community food sovereignty, including a restorative framework for Indigenous-based policy reform in hunting, fishing, and gathering rights, and forestry, fisheries, rangeland, environmental conservation, health, agriculture, and rural and community development. So we can answer Secretary of Agriculture Perdue and his Get Bigger or Get Out with the words of Johanna Ruprecht, who's an organizer with the Land Stewardship Project in Minnesota. And she responded, "Don't get big or get out. Get together and fight back." So thank you. And now I'd be happy to answer questions. Or we can go on to the other speakers first and have questions at the end. I leave it up to you, Alexis.
Yeah, we'll go around, and then so hold your questions or feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll read them aloud after all the panelists have shared. I'm just gonna, our microphone in the room seems to have turned off, so just give me 5 seconds to repair our microphone in the room, Rafa, and then Rafa's next, right, Alexis? Okay. Hopefully this works. Oh wait, that's the wrong button. Okay, that's a good sign. Ooh, fancy sounds. Okay. All right. Hopefully this works better for everyone in the room. Rafa, are you gonna share your screen at all?
Nope.
Okay. Great. We'll get you up on the big screen then. You can go anytime.
Oh, okay. I was just waiting for you guys.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if I'm gonna get this thing to work the way I wanted it to.
Okay. Well, first of all, yeah, thanks for allowing me the space to be able to talk today. And I'm so glad that Elizabeth Henderson is here as well and mentioned a lot of the things that she did. Because of the reason why I got into farming, I'm born and raised in the South Bronx. And for me, working with land and issues around food, this came to me as an effort of justice. It wasn't just solely to return to the land. It was an effort in justice to feed my communities of the South Bronx who didn't have access to these foods. Foods that they grew up and culturally loving and eating and having prepared for them by their families. And I'm now a rural farmer in upstate New York, and the context is way different, but the aims are still the same. So even though I'm in a rural area, there's large scale food insecurity. And my intervention into that system is through farming, organizing, and social justice. So like I've been quoted saying plenty of times, I'm currently the only Black farmer in Tompkins County. And that comes with a caveat, because I didn't get to explain it a little more in detail as I did before. I say that because of the surveys that Elizabeth just shared with us. The ag census that comes out in the last one was 2017. So there's many more Black farmers, but they're just not recognized by the USDA because they are not the owners of their land. They don't own the means of production that they actually work on. But that's not to take away from them as farmers. That's the last thing that I want to do. But to be recognized by the United States government as being only one of the 164 Black farmers of New York State is very, very important. There's currently on the same rolls 57,000 farmers in New York State and only 164 Black farmers. So why is that? There's a lot of questions to answer there, and I think we can do some. We have a lot of work to do, and the Green New Deal or something similar offers us a great opportunity to do that. And so, to all respect to the new vanguard of CSA farms, I mean that is a very important model for direct marketing that farmers are able to use and have relationship to their customers. But the first CSA farmer was a Black man in the United States context, Booker T. Watley, who started his CSA farm in Alabama, and he was a professor out of Tuskegee. And why I mention that is because it's very important to not erase what the contributions of people of color are in the United States. I'm also considered a first-generation farmer, which seems very odd considering my ancestors were brought here to this country in order for agriculture hundreds of years ago. But the USDA considers me a first-generation farmer. So we need to acknowledge those histories, and part of the Green New Deal, or the original New Deal, a lot of the work that went into that was to hire authors and writers to be able to document the history so they're not lost. So I'm just coming back from, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. I just came back from the Carolina Meat Conference and was amazed by some of the speakers there. Michael Twitty, who wrote his book, The Cooking Gene, who describes how the history of barbecue was brought from the Caribbean. The Taino and the Arawak people of the Caribbean is now celebrated throughout the world as this like highfalutin food. $20 for a small plate of short ribs. But the barbecuing of meats was something that came from over an open fire with wood, was something that came from West Africa and was brought to the US, right? So these cultural traditions, and he actually was able to serve a recipe from the antebellum South from a man named, sorry, I'll bring up his name in a second. But there was a man who was a freed slave who was documented through the last WPA Works project. And he was able to revive his recipe for barbecue that had been in his family for hundreds of years, and be able to tell that story through a WPA Public Works project, through the Federal Writers Project. So what if we had something like that for the Green New Deal? The Green New Deal must incorporate all the different sectors of society that we wish to make a remedy on. And the Green New Deal is just that, a deal, right? This is a compromise. This is a plan to put into place. But what we need is a green revolution. And I'm not talking about Norman Borlaug. We don't need that kind of industrial agriculture, but we need a grassroots movement that will incorporate elements of justice into farming and food. So we need more Black farmers. And how radical do we want our solutions to be around this? I think of the US, there's so many measures that are being put into place around invasive species management, and trying to restore or even conserve different elements of our environment. But the US, Americans, we are an invasive species into this continent, and we broke a chain of sustainable agriculture that went back 14,000 years. So we need some remediation ourselves, right? We need to restore some of the hunting rights and the sacred rights of indigenous people to the lands that we're currently on. We have currently a deer overpopulation problem in our woods and forests here in Tompkins County. And that's because we have, as settler colonialists, we've removed the higher species, the predators from eating the deer, and the deer are now eating the young trees. So our forests are not in a place of sustainability. One of the easiest ways that could be done is by allowing indigenous people the rights to their own land to be able to hunt on these things. We also deal with pollution, right, from big agriculture. One of the local issues is our we're known as the Finger Lakes region, our water quality, the beauty of our lakes, but also our lakes are sick. So one of a radical strategy to remediate that would be to grant personhood to Lake Cayuga, right? Corporations are allowed to be people. Why not our lake? If our lake becomes a person, then we would be able to sue on its behalf if anyone were to pollute it, right? So these are semi-radical ideas, but they make a lot of sense. And we need people, the Green New Deal right now is focusing mostly on energy, which it absolutely should. We have an existential crisis that is being driven. Anyone who is in relationship to land understands what is happening. Myself as a small scale farmer, seeing the changes over the past 5 years of our climate, so much has gone on. And if we don't act, we won't be here. But we need to expand beyond energy. There's all different sectors. There's transportation, there's labor, There's the cultural aspects, and we need to be able to enjoy not only food security for our communities, because food security is around access. And access doesn't solve the inequity and the barriers of our food system. We need food justice. We need food sovereignty. We need people to be able to have control over their food system. And all of that means, the labor that goes into it, how the food gets to your plate, to have cooperatives, right? So people actually be able to own the means and the vehicles that food gets to them. So we have a long way to go. But I think by not allowing just the siloing of around these conversations around the Green New Deal to focus on energy, and to allow the marginalized folks, the people on the fringes, to now be centered in their voices. So I look forward to working with folks on creating some policy. Not only, I think this is going to come from the grassroots. This is going to be local solutions and scale up. I think of Adrienne Marie Brown and her book, Emergent Strategies. She talks about the fractal, right? And she uses the fern as an example. It's a structure that even on the smallest level, it just scales up and it looks the same. Whatever you're able to build on a small level can then be built up into a much larger organism. So whatever structures and formulas that we build now in terms of policy, in terms of organizations, in terms of coalitions, are the same ones that are going to be working on a much larger scale to combat what we're all facing. So thank you.
We're going over to Mike and Kirby, right? Okay. So,
Want us to unmute?
yeah, unmute. And I'll mute myself here. That should be fine. Let me just make sure everyone online can hear. That thing's weird. All right. So, no, turning this off then. Okay. You guys let's just do a quick sound check and make sure that online they can hear you, because we just switched up our speakers. So you guys can start talking over there.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
What's
Go
going
ahead.
on?
They'll let us know if they can.
So, Alexis, who would you like to have go first? Me? Okay. So I'm just going to read the city resolution adopting the Ithaca Green New Deal and then make a few comments. This was proposed by Alderperson Molinoff, seconded by Alderperson Brock. Whereas the City of Ithaca Common Council has demonstrated its desire and commitment to be a leader in sustainability and social equity by passing resolutions to join the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, endorse the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, adopt the Climate Smart Communities Pledge, adopt the City of Ithaca Energy Action Plan, adopt Plan Ithaca, the city's comprehensive plan, which features equity and sustainability as thread-through themes and contains the chapter Sustainable Energy, Water, and Food Systems. And whereas the October 2018 report entitled Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 C by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the November 2018 Fourth National Climate Assessment Report found that human-caused climate change is causing an increase in extreme weather events that threaten human life, healthy communities, and critical infrastructure. And whereas there is a clear emerging international consensus that to avoid the most severe impacts of changing climate, we should work together to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is even more ambitious than the previous target of 2 degrees. And whereas to accomplish this, scientists say that the entire world needs to get to net zero emissions by 2050, meaning the same amount of greenhouse gases would have to be absorbed as released into the atmosphere. And whereas the United States should take a leading role in achieving that, but with active resistance at the federal level, it has fallen to the states, to local governments, and to individual citizens to lead the way. And whereas versions of a Green New Deal, which have been proposed at both the federal and state level, aim to address climate change and other societal problems like economic inequality and racial injustice, and whereas local sustainability professionals, activists, and a growing youth climate movement have urged the city of Ithaca to show more leadership on these challenges, and whereas the city has already taken several steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including the following: performed energy efficiency upgrades and installed rooftop solar energy systems at several locations. I'm not going to read them all. The city is actively working to upgrade its entire inventory of streetlights to LED technology, cutting greenhouse gas emissions 50 to 60% and slashing lighting costs even more dramatically. So there's a whole list of things here that the city has done. I'm going to continue with the whereas. And whereas by adopting a Green New Deal for Ithaca, the city has the opportunity to build on existing momentum and be the most climate forward city in New York State. And whereas there would be multiple benefits besides greenhouse gas reduction, including local job creation and improved community health. And whereas the city of Ithaca acknowledges that to implement the Green New Deal will require support from New York State and the federal government, and whereas to be successfully implemented, the Ithaca Green New Deal must have the support of the city of Ithaca at all levels of government, and whereas the support can be demonstrated at first by the city of Ithaca Common Council through adoption of this resolution, and whereas in accordance with the City of Ithaca Code, there's a number, adoption of regulations, policies, procedures, and local legislative decisions in connection with any action on this list. This action does not require a city environmental quality review. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Ithaca adopts a goal to meet the electricity needs of city government operations with 100% renewable electricity by 2025. Resolved that the City of Ithaca adopts a goal to reduce emissions from the city fleet of vehicles by 50% from the 2001 levels by 2025. And be it further resolved that the city hereby adopts a goal of achieving a carbon neutral city by 2030. And be it further resolved that the city endorses the following actions to achieve these goals: create a climate action plan, track and report progress towards the goals, adopt a green building policy, adopt a green building policy for new buildings in 2019, adopt a green building policy for existing buildings by 2021, and assign additional staff as needed to implement the plan. And be it further resolved that the mayor and common council will work with department heads and city staff, members of appropriate boards and commissions, businesses, community groups, academic institutions, organizations, and other local governments to develop a comprehensive public input process to enable achievement of these goals. And be it further resolved that the city will ensure that the benefits of the Ithaca Green New Deal are shared among all of our local communities to reduce historical, social, and economic inequities. So, and then it talks about where it has to get sent to the Secretary of State. So one comment I would just make about that is the last one: resolved that the benefits of the Green New Deal are shared among all of our local communities to reduce historical, social, economic inequities. They're not historical, they're persistent, they're current. And so the thing I wanted to say is that at the end of World War II, the nation had an opportunity actually to end structural racism, and it decided to build all those suburbs and only let white people live there. And we are dealing with that policy decision as we speak, all across the nation. And so as people, Rafa talked about the need for a revolution, a grassroots kind of action, to understand that in the context of both federal and state policy, justice has not been the concern of this place. It is not the concern of the corporate world. And so having language that actually says justice is important to us means we are in a fight. A real struggle for both the soul of the nation, the soul of this community, and the nature of what our social relations are going to be. You started off this conversation with an acknowledgement of the land we're on. And when I try to imagine what justice even means in that context, I can't do it. It's okay. There's no way that I can imagine dealing with what it means to give land back. I don't even understand what that would mean. The context of this conversation is farming. I care about farming because I eat every day. I understand that we live in a context in which many people have no idea about the relationship between what they eat every day and what farmers experience. My understanding is that that is intentional. That separation of humans from the land on which we depend is an intentional strategy for generating capital. And so when I try to think about what it means to actually define what a Green New Deal is, I think again about World War II. We are in a crisis, a major existential crisis, and it creates an opportunity for us to rethink the policy framework that governs how we deal with resources, how we distribute resources, and how we make our decisions. It is telling to me that in this resolution, there's this one sentence that talks about historical inequities, when for me, the Green New Deal is about putting that problem in front of us and saying, let's get it done this time. Because if we don't get it done this time, there won't be a next time. I don't think about this in terms of being optimistic or pessimistic. I think about it as what it means I need to do every day, regardless of the outcome. What's important to raise in conversations with the people I'm in rooms with like this, and to deal with the social problem that the condition we have has to do with the habits we have, what we do every day as individuals, and recognizing that making the kinds of shifts that are going to be required of us in the next decade is going to be a major heavy lift. Humans don't change habits easily, and we're going to have to change a lot of them really fast. That suggests to me that we could easily fail. It's like, just because the task is so daunting. I'll say one other thing. The truth is I don't like humans very much. I like the idea of humans a lot. And I like the idea of humans continuing to exist a lot. And so I have to deal with the first thing I said in order to get us there. And so it's not about whether I like people, it's about whether I care about people. And I do. And trying to figure out in this context what it means to recognize that we actually have very simple solutions to the problems that we face. That solutions are pretty simple. Getting them to happen is much more complex. So you want to end poverty? Give poor people money. It's really simple. You know, the United States knows how to give people money. It's just one of the things that this nation does every day. We could decide to implement a guaranteed minimum income, and we'd be done with poverty. It'd be done. It'd be over. It cost us way less than we spend now on not doing it. And that requires a shift in consciousness about what a human being is, what it means to live in community with other human beings, and to shift our idea of what a human being deserves. And so the national narrative right now is that there are some deserving humans and some undeserving humans, and that the reality is we'd actually rather that the undeserving humans actually go away. Where they would go, who cares? As long as that is our sort of national narrative, we can't succeed. If we adopt a national narrative that says everybody deserves to eat every day good food, everybody deserves to understand their obligations to their neighbors and their community, and that is something we actually enculturate, we can get our way out of this. But there are habits of mind that are really going to be very important to address in real conversations every day with the people you encounter. And I think that's probably enough for now. Turn it over to Mike.
So how green is the Green New Deal? How green should the Green New Deal be? Well, it needs to be as green as we know needs to get done. What I would like to start with are a couple words from the actual resolution that AOC, wrote. And I'm specifically reading parts G and J from the Green New Deal resolution. So it says that we must be working collaboratively with farmers and ranchers in the United States to remove pollution and greenhouse gases from the agricultural sector as much as technologically feasible, including 1, by supporting family farming, 2, by investing in sustainable farming and land use practices that increase soil health. And then J, removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and reducing pollution by restoring natural ecosystems through proven low-tech solutions that increase soil carbon storage, such as land preservation and afforestation. I chose those 2 parts of the resolution because they, because they have to do, they either have to do directly with farmers or they talk about soil health. So right now, the way that our farming is done, and I'm sure that we all have this knowledge in this room in one way or another, the way that we treat the soil, our relationship to the soil, allows for an extremely high amount of greenhouse gases to be released from the soil, so much to the point that it's a similar number when you're looking at the overall life cycle to fossil fuel-based transportation. And it's so interesting when we bring that into our conversation, because we start to realize that really it's like, to me, I take that as when we're in bad relationship with our natural systems, whether it's our social systems or our ecosystems, then the greenhouse gases are a reflection of a relationship gone wrong. As if we let a piece of food rot and it goes wrong. So it's, to me, a lot of the Green New Deal has to be rooted in relationship. It has to, because if we don't move forward by unpacking what has been stuffed into really evil relationships and attempting to restore love and sustainability into those relationships, then it's not going to get done. And then, so I learned my first exposure to sustainable food systems, thrivable food systems, regenerative ag, agroecology. It came in a classroom setting, my environmental studies degree at IC. But it's, it changes your perspective immediately when you enter that conversation, because you see the intersections. And so one thing that I walked away with was, and still wondering, because my experience as a farmer is not very much. So a lot of these inquiries I still have, and I'm still exploring. But between that and between a study trip in Puerto Rico, where me and some friends studied this movement of food sovereignty, where young people are either graduating from UPR or getting access to land through the Puerto Rican Land Trust, and getting land and then practicing agroecology and sustainable ag. And so me and some friends, we studied for a handful of days with different farmers and activists and managers of farmers markets. And one thing that we walked away with was that food is at the center of this. Whether it's, if we live in a food desert and we're eating unhealthy food that is not providing us nourishment, and that food, that factory food, the manufactured food, is coming from unsustainable food practices, that is a health issue, that's a social justice issue, that's a climate issue, and that's an ecosystem issue of polluting our waters and soils. Like, when it comes back to the food shed, it should.
It's also a right issue when we don't even have the right to vote for the president, and we have no senators, no representatives. So it's beyond that. It's about survival.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
So yeah, I thank you. And I was just kind of rolling out some of the feelings and that have been kind of packed up, and then just trying to unpack those. And however you break it, we're not going to get this done without a handful of things, and in this context, in this room, without supporting farmers. And not just sustainable farming, but thrivable farming, ways to feed the soil that then are able to feed the crops that then feed the people, as opposed to just trying to get a crop to grow out of the ground with GMOs and pesticides that hurt our ecosystems and hurt our people and hurt our minds and our souls and our relationships. So a Green New Deal has to be it has to be as green as it gets, because without being able to address poor soil practices, we're going to keep emitting these, all these greenhouse gases, and hurting people and ecosystems in the process. But through regenerative ag, we can draw down or sequester a really high amount of greenhouse gases and be able to put that into the soil. And it's a similar thing with afforestation. So regenerative ag is, that's how the Green New Deal needs to go. And we've seen some of these policy proposals from some of the presidential candidates. But I don't know how far these presidential candidates are going to go with tying in sovereignty and soil health and like these intersections I have yet to see be like fully rolled out. But thank you for this space.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing. It's been like a wealth of information and perspectives that I think are really valuable. And one thing is we have these conversations, in most of our Farming for Justice discussion groups, but particularly this, because I see the Green New Deal. And
Now we gotta get the sound back up. Off that computer. We're just gonna make sure everybody can hear. You should be able to hear us now in the room online, and everyone in the room can hear too. Okay, let's try again, Alexis.
Awesome. I was just saying thank you to all of the panelists for offering your resources, your insight, your experience, and your knowledge. And oftentimes, one thing that keeps coming to mind for me, especially in this conversation when we're talking about policy and we're talking about like sustainable and regenerative policy for basically the survival of our planet and the human species, that we have farming as being this intersection of a lot of information in the Green New Deal, but there's not a lot of farmers in the actual conversation, which I do find problematic. And so I'm just wondering from all of you who are offering words on this panel, how many conversations are you having with farmers? And if you know of farmers locally that are supporting the Green New Deal, or if there's any farmers that are tuned in or in this room here that want to talk about the Green New Deal from your farming experiential perspective. Not to say that you didn't, Rafa, because you definitely did, and I'm very grateful. Especially as a person of color farmer, I know that for me, there's a lot of essential key points, I think, that basically everybody's touched on: food access, food security, food justice, and food sovereignty. And I guess, I don't know if it was explicitly said, but land access are quintessential aspects in this conversation that I don't know how to make it more relevant to people who are farming and are subsistence farming or production farming and are able to do that in a way where they're making ends meet. I think a lot of the conversations we have in the community that I'm a part of is how we can make a couple of worlds, these two worlds, kind of intersect in a bigger way, where, you know, regenerative agriculture becomes a new norm and becomes something that's strived for and becomes something that we push to be really important in actually the larger farming community. So I was just wondering, as kind of like a discussion prompt, like how we can kind of go forward talking about the intersection of all of these ideas. Anybody wants to try to show up there anyway? What were you doing?
I was trying to get the people online to see you, but I failed.
My video is off.
Okay, but that's okay. Now we'll go to other people anyway. It's okay.
Yeah, I'll chime in if I can. I mean, that's a very good point. Those are very good points. I mean, you know, when we meet as a young farmer coalition, and there's young farmers. I mean, young is a relative word. I mean, the median age, and if someone else has the number, please correct me. I think in New York State is 61 is the median age for a farmer. So young is a bit of a relative term. But every time we gather, we talk about farming as in the United States, farming is a business. Farming is an agribusiness. And many farmers are already working another job. And in addition to farming, I consider myself a part-time farmer at 40 hours a week. The majority of the rest of the time is spent with around organizing and doing this kind of work. And I think we also need to get away from that model as well, where, I mean, in order for something to be a job, that means that you have to be able to make a living at it, right? That's what people work for. But there's so much more value that is when you farm, you're in relationship to the land. So people who are in relationship to the land, they understand exactly environmentally and culturally what is happening in this moment. So these are the people on the front lines that are actually trying to remedy what's going on. And a lot of them aren't able to draw an income in order to sustain basic things like healthcare, to be able to provide for their families, to be able to put away for money for retirement. That's a joke. I mean, most folks don't even have money put away for retirement who are entering into farming. However, I see all the beneficial aspects that come out of farming, and trying to train a new generation to now come into something where people who have already been doing it for years can't make a living at, seems like a losing proposition, right? But it's essential. It's absolutely necessary, because how else are we going to build our relationship to the land in the first place? These are the people who are telling me that the forests are dying, right? The ash borer is killing the majority of ash in our forests right now. And these are people who are seeing the effects of that. They're seeing the water run different on their land. The key lines are different, right? The water table is higher. Here where we get 47 inches on average of precipitation per year, what does that mean when you get that all in once, right? In 2 months, or withstanding droughts. But there's so much more. There's a healing aspect that comes to farming. I've met so many people, whether that be veterans who are coming back from conflicts, and they turn back to the land in order to restore their mental health, right? Reclaiming the work and the spiritual traditions of our ancestors and being able to have access to that. There's so many more compounded benefits of being in right relationship to the land. And it's something that the human beings have done since the beginning of time. So I think we need to be able to allow and make it, right now, sustainable farmers are at the mercy of the free market. There's no subsidies for organic farming, right? There's no subsidies. I'm not getting paid from the federal government or local government to produce what I'm producing. I'm selling it at market value, right? Why is that? What if the people that I'm serving, the marginalized populations, whether that's seniors or youth in schools, why isn't our municipalities paying for local farmers to provide these services for their community? It's a question. I think that could be solved through policy, but I think it's more than dollars and cents. It's what makes sense.
I would like to add to that. I really appreciate what you just said, Raphael. And that's why I think in seizing this opportunity that the Green New Deal presents to us, we have to couple racial justice and equity with parity pricing that resolves the economic structure issue. The way things have been working since the late 50s is taxpayers pay subsidies to keep farms going. But those subsidies do not make up for the money that farmers are not getting because the prices are so low. So actually, the subsidies are a huge transfer of wealth to the biggest corporations. We have to address that. And the only way we're going to be able to address that is by combining our movements, the huge energy of the movement now for racial justice, among food workers for Fight for 15, farm workers who are finally starting to organize, Indigenous people who are not just still here, they're stirring, and there's so much that we have to learn from them.
Elizabeth, it sounds like you moved away from your microphone a little bit.
Oh, I didn't actually.
Oh, okay. You're very quiet on our end, but let's keep trying.
Okay. Anyway, we need to build a big enough movement the way it was the huge social movement in the 30s that brought about the New Deal. The only way we'll get a new Green New Deal that includes all of these totally pressing issues is if we can work together and somehow break down the barriers that separate farmers and farm workers, black and white, Native American, the invaders that all of us are, and work together to retake power from the big corporate entities who have seized it.
You keep talking about working together and racial inequalities, and I want to make sure that we actually center Kirby and of course Rafa. But Kirby being here, what they said was, I can breathe now. I've been here 6 weeks, and Ithaca is one of the most disgustingly racist places that I have ever been to. So how can we work together if the majority of people walking around think that they're not racist? All the white people in this room, what are you doing?
So before you try to answer that question, let me just say one of the policy frameworks, at least in terms of national policy, is how USDA functions and how the Farm Bill gets constructed. And that becomes a political problem that has to do with who's in Congress and who's in the Senate. That's where a tremendous amount of the money is around what gets subsidized and what gets supported. And as long as the job of USDA is feeding us corn, we will have this problem. And so, having people understand how this system actually works, what it's designed to do, and then make our decisions about, is that okay with us? That our ag system is actually designed through USDA policy basically to poison us. And is everybody okay with that? And if not, there are some political implications. Now that's a heavy lift. But we got 4 years to do it. They just passed a farm bill that has its own disasters in it. And there'll be another one in 4 years. White people want to answer.
Yeah, all this working together, racial inequalities. I've been here 6 weeks. I don't know how the POC do it. I'm leaving in 7 weeks, and I'm at an Ivy University that politely asked me to leave because they are uncomfortable that I bring up social justice in biotechnology and farming. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere, but this is a serious issue that Ithaca has. And I don't want to hear any racial inequalities and let's work together with no follow-up, no understanding of, for example, you went to Puerto Rico, but did you actually know we don't have a vote? Did you know that it goes beyond the land, literally survival? The US abandoned us since 2017. 5,000 Puerto Ricans lost their lives. We're trapped in this situation. We have no power. So go beyond that. What does that mean, work together?
It's a great question. I mean, this group was designed to exactly for that reason. A year ago, to bring together the intersection of justice and farming, and in our history of this being around for like a year and a half, what happens is the room is actually not filled with many farmers, who are almost all white, and it's a challenge that we've seen at Groundswell. The more and more we commit to equity and justice in farming, and like Rafa was saying, like, let's have more Black farmers, let's have more Puerto Rican farmers, let's have more all farmers that are non-white, and how do we increase those opportunities for the groups that are, like as Kirby was saying, not historically marginalized but still marginalized today, and even just engaging farmers in these conversations is a challenge that we face all the time. So we you know, at Groundswell, it's like continuing these conversations, continuing this work, and asking that question, like, you know, what are the answers in the room to say or online, how do we work together?
You see, I'm gonna show up if they know that, you know, every space that I've been to, nonstop microaggressions, nonstop. It's exhausting. I'm exhausted, and I've only been here 6 weeks.
Yeah, I've heard that about Ithaca.
6 weeks, and
Right.
I'm like, I actually skipped my I'm being recorded. I skipped my program this morning because
We'll
I
keep
could
you
not.
anonymous.
I could not stand it anymore.
Right.
I came here looking for POC, hopefully.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I came.
And the question, one of the people asked, you know, and it's related to what you're saying is, you know, what are a consequence of the New Deal meant that agriculture risks were shifted to minority farmers, which led to bankruptcy, land loss, and a decimation of BIPOC farmers in the U.S. What unintended consequences do you see that the panelists or anyone in the room that the Green New Deal may do the same? And so, you know, how are we working together to avoid those unintended consequences? How are they going to be? Like, we learned from the past, so how do we, or maybe we didn't, but how do we avoid that now and ensure what you're saying? Like, how do we work together? I think, yeah, I mean, do
Well, I think
people
it
want to
goes
comment on
what
that?
Rafa said. I mean, why would somebody?
I have a
go-
comment.
They're only going to lose money. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so the question of how does subsidy happen so that it actually becomes an attractive financial pursuit?
Mhm.
Now that's when I looked at Elizabeth's numbers, I said, okay, we're done. Who's going to decide to do that who's 22?
Mhm.
Right, I got to work 3 jobs in order to do this thing, and because I love the land so much. I mean, and I can't afford the land, and they're not going to count me because I can't afford the land. I mean, the context for actually shifting people into this pursuit is so poor, and that's why I go back to the USDA, and that's where the policy framework is. If the USDA's policy framework was not get bigger or get out, but rather we want as many small farmers in the country as we can produce, and we will subsidize that happening, then you have a different context. But that's a political problem. I mean,
It's also an economic problem. I think the whole context of this whole discussion has been avoiding the topic of capitalism itself as the main issue, because capitalism is founded on racism, is founded on slavery, is founded on stealing land and commodifying people. So until we're like really willing to have that discussion, then changing the policy at the USDA doesn't matter for shit. Because the Green New Deal, whatever it looks like, whatever it becomes, is going to be a capitalist solution to these problems. That's the elephant in the room. So, and I think socialism, the word gets thrown out a lot, and I think gets misused a lot, probably on purpose a lot of times. But it's also, that's another 20th century solution to organizing people. Like, what's next? Like, this is beyond like, oh, we need to, have a form of government. This is like survival.
I have a suggestion for some immediate action. This year,
as do I.
legislature in New York.
Yeah, I don't know why we're not. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Let's try again. We weren't hearing you.
The legislature in New York State passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection
No,
Act.
I don't have any sound for you at the moment, Elizabeth. I don't know. Let's try again, Elizabeth.
Okay. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was passed this year by the legislature, and it establishes a council that will actually make the plans for what will happen to reach carbon neutrality for New York State. So there's a possibility to get a farmer of color on that council, and there will also be an advisory committee on agriculture and forestry. Let's push together to get some farmers of color, some young farmers on that advisory committee so that their voices are heard in developing the policy that will go forward in New York State. And that legislation includes 35% or more of the resources that are invested going to marginalized communities. So there's a real important possible source of funding for some of the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, could I chime in? And I see in the comments, Asaya, I hope I pronounce your name right. I was going to bring up this same thing. Elizabeth Warren released a policy paper around foreign policy. And one of the major tenets of it was to increase representation in the field by farmers of color. It sounded like a great policy. Unfortunately, no one in leadership on her team was a farmer of color, a black farmer. No one was a black farmer. So I was also a signatory on the same letter that said, you know, we are not looking for opportunities. We want outcomes. We want outcomes. How do we switch to outcomes, right? And it's not about just being heard. We need to have it connected to a plan of action. We can't just have more voices in a room. You know, I don't want a seat at the table. I have my table that I'm using right now. Can you call it a table too? You know, there are so many ways to get to this, and I think we're thinking big picture. I heard mention of socialism and like having to now re-engineer complete different levels of governance, right? We're talking about federal level policy. Absolutely, that ship needs to get turned around or sunk or get on a new ship, whatever the thing is. But what can we do locally as a policy, right? I think about what happened in Puerto Rico and Maria, and knowing that, so when the University of Puerto Rico was hit and the libraries were destroyed by Hurricane Maria, Cornell, as a university, refused to take in the students, right? There was an opportunity to do so as an Ivy League university, and did not want to take them in. Eventually they did, because they caved from public pressure from students and faculty to say, you have to, right? So we're already seeing the first waves of climate refugees, right? How can we turn it into action, right? We need more local movements and policy being built based in action. Please don't ask me what my opinion is and then do something completely different, right? I've been saying we need more equity on the front line. Let's commit that to an outcome. If you're serious about creating new farmers of color, new indigenous farmers in the area, how many what's it going to take? How many can you commit to making, right? This is not just the work of people who are marginalized. This needs to be everyone's work. I can't be in charge of my own liberation and then get you together as well. There's so much more work that needs to get done. And before we have the calls for unity and coalition work, there needs to be a shared understanding and values of what the work is. And right now, there's plenty of allies, whether that be farmers or support organizations, that say they support Black farmers, but it's my work, right? I'm supposed to do it and let you know what the work is to do. We need to now, it just needs to be everyone's work. So I'm gonna leave that right there.
I just wanted to make a comment about, I heard all morning kind of a common thread running both at the front and at the back of what almost everyone has said is a need to think about and develop local and regional focus for our work. I am not persuaded at all that answers we need here are going to come from Washington or Albany. Yes, be involved, do all those kinds of things. But I think we need to think through what we can do here locally. And it's, as Rafa said, it's everybody's work. It's not just people of color, it's not just white people, it's not just allies, it is all of us to do this work. And I'm not committed to a capitalist system or a socialist system. I think we have to think through what we need here. And it probably won't happen in my lifetime, given my age. But let's work, let's do it.
Well, I think you also have to be careful with saying not just white people, because white people have the power. Like, for example, right now, Give Me Coffee, how do you know about Give Me Coffee? And how one of their employees, their Black employee, dared vent on their private Facebook about the racism they were experiencing. So Give Me Coffee demoted them and cut their pay.
Yeah.
It's not the first time that's happened either.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
So I don't work there anymore.
what's anyone doing?
What I
You don't have any power.
what I would say is that those those who perpetuated oppression bear a greater burden to both do work that is recuperative and regenerative around that. You know, as the indigenous scholar Eve Tuck argues, decolonization is not a metaphor. It is not about having a clever idea to reinvent the social sciences or whatever. It is about returning the land to people whose land it is. And so those of us who have been part of the oppressive culture, we do bear a greater burden in this. But this work that we're talking about this morning cannot only be done by those who have this history of being the oppressor. It has to be all of us.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it's past 10:30, and this conversation has been really lovely. And that was over. 2 more hours. So back to normal life. No, I'm just kidding. I think I'm too emotionally invested in this conversation right now to facilitate with an unbiased perspective. But I'll just leave it at that and say that I will be emailing everybody who registered. Everybody that was present will also get an email because you have all registered, which is why you're here, with some of the topics that we touched on, some of the resources. And then if anybody wants to share resources or re-share any thoughts, or even just say that you're interested in continuing this conversation, just say that in the email, and we will make sure to figure out how to facilitate space in this conversation and make sure that we keep this momentum going. But otherwise, I just want to say in that email, you'll also get a link for an evaluation. Please fill it out. And I'm so grateful to Elizabeth, Rafa, Kirby, Mike, for contributing to the panel, to everybody that contributed in conversation and comments and presence. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.